With that being said, it is my pleasure to introduce Amir Memić, co-founder and chief operating officer of CenterStream, an energy infrastructure company backed by Greystar. From a war-disciplined childhood in Bosnia and Herzegovina to executive leadership in the U.S. energy sector, his journey reflects resilience, purpose, and disciplined growth. In his talk, From Refugee to Energy Executive, Powering a Life of Purpose, Amir will share lessons from his path, from entry-level engineer to executive leader, and highlight the vital role of energy infrastructure in driving economic prosperity. Please join me in welcoming Amir Memić.
Thank you all for the kind welcome, and thank you, Eddie, to you personally for the opportunity to speak here today, to the Future Leaders Summit as well, for everyone that worked really hard. I can see everything that's gone into this event. It's an incredible feat, and thank you. I think what you're doing is incredible, Eddie, bringing the whole world together, right? I think we're in a unique situation given the diasporas all over the world. Maybe the closest correlation that we have to something like this with the Bosnian diaspora is more than likely the Israeli situation post-World War II. So I think we've got a special opportunity to hopefully do something similar with the Bosnian diaspora all across the planet. So thank you all for the interest in listening to me today. So I'll grab the clicker. Let's see. So I had the opportunity to think about how I wanted to present today. And I could have spoken to you all about everything that's gone right in my career and my life, but I don't think there's much to be learned about when things go right. So I would prefer to talk to you about things that went wrong along my path to eventually become an executive. But before I jump into all of that, those details, I'd like to first introduce myself. So my name is Amir Memic. I was born in Sanski Most, and I'm married to my beautiful wife, Mina, maiden name Yasharovic. And our two children that you see there, the younger one is Mia on my shoulders, and you see Lana on my wife's shoulders. I'm a girl dad, and I love being a girl dad, and it comes with a lot, and I can't see life any different. So that's me, who I am at a personal level, right? I've been blessed to have lived in Austin, Texas for the last 32 years of my life. We relocated there as refugees back in '93, and it was completely random. It's not like we had the foresight to understand where we were going at the time, but we made the best of it, and it was an incredible home, to be frank, and still is today. My family and I, we thoroughly enjoy traveling. I play football when I can, and then we've recently picked up in the last 5-6 years skiing, as it's an extremely expensive sport in the U.S., and I didn't have the privilege to do so when I was younger. So that's me personally, and what we'll do today here is run through these slides, and then I'd like to leave 5 to 10 minutes at the end so you guys can ask me questions. I think there's more to be learned from questions than there are actual slides themselves. My professional career, as you can see, I'm the Chief Operating Officer at CenterStream. CenterStream is a energy company, okay? So not just electricity, though. So there's different forms of energy. There's thermal energy, and then there's electrification as well. So we produce two forms of thermal energy. That's steam or hot water, heat, or chilled water for cooling purposes. And then, of course, as a byfactor of some of those products, you also can generate electricity. You do this for multiple reasons. It's to drive up efficiencies when you're converting some form of resource, such as natural gas, into energy. And also to diversify your revenue streams from a standpoint of cash flows. I've got over 15 years of experience in the energy industry, and I was very blessed to have worked at some of the largest companies, both in Texas and the world, before forming my own company. And we'll talk about some of the processes and failures, if you will, that got me to how I started my company. I think it was January 1st of this year that we actually closed an investment with Greystar, a massive private equity that has $330 billion under direct and indirect management across the globe. They're one of the largest real estate investors globally, focusing on multifamily and student housing. And so they saw a diversification opportunity with large infrastructure. They already know infrastructure through housing and large assets such as this convention center, right? So the next natural progression for them was energy infrastructure, and they brought myself and my business partner along to basically head up their entire energy infrastructure investment arm. And that is Centerstream, by the way. So academically, I've got a master's in business and undergraduate studies in electrical engineering, both at the University of Texas. And I've got a professional engineering license in the state of Texas as well. So, and I'll move around a little bit, so I don't want to be stuck in one place. But, you know, a picture speaks 1,000 words. This is probably the best way to start the presentation so you guys get to kind of understand who I am. These names likely don't mean much in Bosnia, and they're not as probably well known. But throughout the U.S., some of these names are pretty significant. So University of Texas, you guys probably know, but is a top, one of the top programs, competes with Ivy League in the U.S. It's extremely difficult to get into. So, you know, I knew that my life was going to be dictated by my academic performance early on in my life, and therefore I spent significant hours making sure that I was going to be the best and most competent student. That was my differentiator early on and gave me the opportunity to not be the best, but continue the progression of education, right? So when you finish school, that doesn't mean you just stop learning. What makes you successful later in life throughout your career is the continuation of learning, and that's what I was blessed with learning at an early age. So after graduating, I went to work at Guarantee Electric. It's a company that does about $500 million in revenue in the St. Louis region. The biggest reason I went up there is because that's where I met my wife. So it was not a strategic move whatsoever. I had done an internship with the company and had a lot of respect for them, and like vice versa. But at the end of the day, I had graduated in the middle of the Great Recession after 2007. The job market was limited. I had numerous opportunities, but the best one that made sense for me from a personal perspective and professional was to go spend some time with my wife in St. Louis. Unfortunately, as life would have it, the reason I only spent, I don't think this works, but the reason I only spent a year at that company, which is not very professional, is because my parents' health started to decline pretty rapidly. So both of my parents are disabled, and I had a very difficult time during undergraduate studies and afterwards, because I was responsible for both taking care of them and a much younger brother that was born right as I was starting school. And so I had to make a very difficult decision to actually leave pretty much a dream job, to be frank, because I was treated so well, to go back and help my family. And so that's where I started my first Texas job at LCRA. LCRA is the second largest vertically integrated energy company in the state of Texas. They are it's called Public Power because they're a quasi-state agency. So they don't take any tax revenues, but they basically, all the revenues that they generate are on a nonprofit basis, and they reinvest it back into the state for energy infrastructure, right? And there I literally came in as a young engineer, associate one, knew nobody, and had to make a name for myself. So you'll see later in the presentation how I did that, and I'll get into some of the weeds and maybe some of the lessons that I learned. But the important thing to note there is that it was a continued progression of studying and becoming an expert at something, right? And in my field, it was becoming an expert in the energy infrastructure field and understanding what it meant as an engineer to build it. In parallel, you'll see the 2016 to 2018 timelines match up. Towards the end of my tenure at LCRA, I actually ended up going back to get my master's in business during evening hours. So it's called a professional MBA in the States. So you actually continue working full-time while you're going to school in the evenings. We decided to make life a little bit more challenging, so we had our first kid during that time as well. So not much sleep was occurring at the moment. So from 2018 to 2021 there, I became the Director of Development. After graduating from the MBA program and leaving LCRA, I ended up leaving to go to Fortune 200. NextEra Energy is the largest publicly traded utility and renewable player in the world. Maybe on these parts of the world, you might be familiar with Engie, Total, Eni, some of those players, RWE out of Deutschland. But globally speaking, NextEra Energy is the largest player, and my responsibility there was the entire Texas market. And again, we'll get into the details of how it all went down. So sometimes so NextEra is they are the Google of my industry, if you will, right? Or the NVIDIA for some of you others that are out there. But, you know, you go into these large organizations thinking that, man, you're really going to get to start learning some incredible things working for the #1 company in your industry. And sure enough, you discover that they don't even quite understand how all of it works, right? So we'll go into those details. And then from 21, I picked the perfect time to do it in the middle of COVID. And from 21 on to present, I actually co-founded Confluent Power, which later went on to become CenterStream Energy, what is known as CenterStream Energy today. So the biggest lesson in all of this timeline, if you will, is that engineering taught me to think rigorously and solve complex problems, to become a competent and technical expert in a room filled with financial experts. The business training helped me connect technology to value creation. So as an engineer, you understand how to solve complex problems and you think logically, but until you can marry how that world actually works with the dollars, it doesn't make a difference. And that's something we'll talk about here shortly. So why did I choose to pursue a career in life in energy infrastructure? For me, it was pretty basic, I would say. As a young kid, I loved tinkering with electronics, so I was blessed because we didn't have much money, and so I had to figure it out on my own. And so I would take things apart. I would take old fax machines apart. I would break things, fix them, try to learn how they worked. And so what I started to realize as a young kid, honestly, was that everything that I was playing with required some form of energy, right? Whether I was plugging it into AC or DC, it didn't matter. In order to run it, it was going to require power. And so early on, I started to realize that, hey, this world really runs off of power, everything I look at. And so that gave me kind of the foundation knowledge and kind of the drive to go into the field of electrical engineering and power systems. And again, these are high-level reasons why the power system is extremely important. So it becomes the foundation of our modern-day economy, as everyone obviously sees. You know, currently we're talking about data centers, right? But everything you could imagine, from hospitals to military sites to schools to this complex itself, is running off of some form of electric power and then some form of thermal energy as well. I was just in Vienna yesterday, and I fly back today, actually. And was, you know, being a geek, right, in the energy industry, I was Googling to try to figure out, actually, I was chat-GPTing, no longer Googling. I was chat-GPTing, like, where did the energy sources in Vienna? What is heating and cooling downtown Vienna? And sure enough, it's a form of district energy. So they have a large district energy plant that feeds underground steam through the rest of the city and heats up all the buildings. It's a little bit of what I do. So, again, realizing early on in my life that I was going to move into the energy field, it was very evident and obvious to me that I was going to have to become a technical expert. But as I continued to progress in my professional career, the thing that I started to realize that you could only go so far in being the best engineer in the room. You actually have to be able to convert the technical knowledge into value creation, into some form of business deal, right? And that's where the fundamental understanding of what cash flows look like and what contracts of those tied to those cash flows look like. And so it's probably like a couple of years into my engineering profession that I realized that, hey, I need to start. And I minored in business, but I realized quickly that I needed to start putting things together and understanding the big why at any company I worked at. So why was I doing my job? Why was I doing the task? Not even just my job. Why was I doing that specific task? And how did that task tie to the bottom line? That is the why, right? At the end of the day, you're working to make money for somebody or yourself. And so this became my principle of life, is to understand the full life cycle of the generation and creation of the electron, if you will. You're not really creating it, you're stripping a valence electron, but the inception of the electron to the consumption of the electron, tied to the dollars from the consumption, and then pushing those dollars all the way back to the bottom line of your financial statements. That became the goal of my career. How do I understand the full life cycle of energy and then understand how the full life cycle of money also ties to it? So why is energy infrastructure so important, right? I think I think Time magazine named the grid the most advanced innovation or the biggest innovation in human history. And there's a reason for that. Not the wheel, nothing else. It's the actual electrical grid. It's because in order to form a modern economy, you have to have certain infrastructure in place in order for other businesses to thrive. And this same goes in your household, right? Like, your kids will never be successful unless you create the structure for your kids to be successful. And so what I see myself in doing is creating the structure for the rest of the economy to function. And so you could see the names. So on the y-axis here, we have GDP per capita. On the x-axis, you have energy system maturity, and that's the complexity and the resiliency of a grid. You can see that the nations named to the top right are some of your top performing nations of the world. And for reference, I put Bosnia there in the middle so you could see where we stand. Bosnia is actually a thriving energy infrastructure, if you will, system. Unfortunately, it's fallen behind as far as advancement has been concerned due to lack of investment. Bosnia itself is a net exporter of energy in Europe, and we are there are not many countries in this world that are net exporters of energy, so we are actually very blessed to have that opportunity. The unfortunate factor is that cash flow being reinvested in an efficient manner to continue being a powerhouse in the rest of Europe. And I can't subjectively speak to that because I don't know it well enough, but generally speaking, if you use common sense and look around, I think sometimes that tells you more than technical statistics. So again, for me, everything is based off of the foundation of life and foundation of structure. Therefore, you need infrastructure, energy, highways, transport, right, in order to have a thriving civilization. And that is my goal at the end of the day, is to provide a resilient infrastructure for any customer that I end up serving. And I had the blessing to do so in the state of Texas for most of my career, and the recipe is a beautiful recipe, if you will. Some of you maybe have had the opportunity to visit Austin, Texas, and the rest of the region. I call it the Dubai of the U.S. It's incredible. So my first step in learning the actual grid on the technical side of things was working at LCRA. Again, this is the progression that you see in my roles, starting off as an engineer associate, moving into leadership roles, and then eventually pivoting over from technical roles into strategic analyst roles. But at the end of the day, I was going to have to learn how large power lines worked, right? What was the purpose and the intent of stepping up power to larger voltages? What was the purpose of developing robust substations? How do you then take this infrastructure and interconnect renewables and other power plants to the grid in an efficient and reliable manner? And eventually, how does all of that eventually tie into corporate strategy and cash flows, right? And I was blessed that early on in my career, I was given the opportunity, and I asked for the opportunity to always pursue projects that maybe nobody else wanted because they were tedious projects. But those tedious projects end up turning into probably some of the best experiences that I ever could have had, and gave me the name recognition within the companies themselves. And so, I spent many, many more hours as a salary employee. 40 hours a week was not a standard thing for me. I think that's like vacation mode. Sadly, I've not had much preparation for this presentation, guys. So last night every night I'm up until very late hours working. I'm working on multiple acquisitions right now. And so what you're hearing here is for the first time very raw. I'm kind of winging it. And so anyways, long story short, learning the base fundamentals is going to require many, many hours, no matter what you end up doing in your life. I think statistically speaking, you need 10,000 hours of any one topic in order to become proficient at that topic. And you've got a choice. Either you could take 10 years or 5 years. It's up to you. If you work 80 hours a week, it'll take a lot less. All right, so I understood this, and I think this was ingrained in me at a very young age because I have 2 disabled parents and I had a lot of responsibility. And so for me, work was fun, actually. It was the first time in my life that I was actually getting compensated for something that, was second nature at that point. I was getting paid to learn, which is how you have to start thinking about life. And so I love challenges. And so what I did is I just threw myself at the biggest challenges in each one of these technical components, and opportunities, and they became my life, to be frank. And so all of those gave me the opportunities to learn the fundamentals of how the grid is designed, how you balance resiliency, redundancy in the grid is, from a reliability standpoint with the dollars, how all of them. Then I went into like understanding about the regulatory structure and nature of infrastructure as well, to understand how the dynamics of a rate-regulated entity would work, and eventually tied it to strategic planning. So the second step was, after learning all the fundamentals and having all the baseline knowledge developed, right, to become a technical expert and hold my own in a room, I had the opportunity to join frontline leadership. And this was in the middle of actually my MBA studies. It was a good opportunity to learn how to step away from not being a technical expert and doing everything yourself quickly, to basically, leading a multidisciplinary team, taking maybe 2x the amount of time to teach people how to do something and add much more value than just yourself. The other skill set that this taught me was that I quickly realized that I might be maybe not the smartest person in the world. I might be the most competent technically person in the world, but that only takes you so far. I realized that I was going to have to start learning how to communicate up and down the chain of leadership, right? Not everybody that's a CEO or a COO or a CFO or any of that has technical knowledge. And so you have to be able to be an extremely good communicator and breaking down problems in order to describe what's happening and to be successful. And frontline leadership, if you will, gave me that opportunity to speak to executives, but then at the same time speak to frontline staff. So I can't reiterate this enough. Communication is extremely key. Like you could be the smartest person in the world, if you can't cleanly express your thoughts, right, in a clear and concise manner, you're never going to be successful, ever. So if there's one thing to work on, it is your communication skills. And this did not come naturally to me. So I took it upon myself to, as crazy as this sounds, reading incredible amounts of books on this, hiring executive coaches to teach me, filming myself giving presentations such as this with these executive coaches. These are actually like Hollywood acting coaches. And putting myself in a position to have the iterations that were going to be required to get those 10,000 hours. So in addition to communicating verbally, your written language has to also match. So this sounds crazy, and maybe I'm a little bit OCD, but before I send any email, I'll actually read that email multiple times. And as you get busier and busier in your career, there's less and less opportunity for that, so sometimes you just hit send. But I always reread my emails to make sure that all my communication was clear and mistake-free. And then eventually, if you do this consistently over a long period of time, it allows you to build trust with other professionals and leaders in your organization, and that eventually leads to opportunity. So my third step was actually mid-level management, and this was leaving, if you recall, leaving LCRA and going to NextEra Energy, a Fortune 200 company. It was actually a difficult decision I had to make because I was already in senior leadership at LCRA, and I was already picked basically to become the next VP of different business units. And when this opportunity came up, I went and sat down with my executive and I said, hey, I've got this opportunity, what are your thoughts? And we just had a human-to-human conversation to say, what's best for Amir, third person Amir, and his career? And after a long conversation, it became evident that that you could only learn so much from one organization and one organism, if you will, after being there a decade. Eventually, you have to go out there and start understanding what different flavors of the energy industry or any industry look like. And the only way you're going to do that is by throwing yourself into a different organization. And so I did that. I joined NextEra Energy, again, largest publicly traded renewable player in the world. And my responsibility became the entire Texas market. So I hinted at this earlier in the presentation, and going to work for the Google of my industry, I was thinking, oh man, I'm really I'm gonna be a nobody coming into this, and I'm gonna, one, struggle, but hopefully two, have the opportunity to learn because they're gonna be able to teach me. And so that's why I did it. Well, as it may happen sometimes, you sometimes get surprised by life more than you would like. So I ended up getting the offer, getting the job, and I prepared thoroughly for the job because I did not want to fail. So I spent probably 2 months creating like a 50-page document with a strategic analysis of how I was going to optimize this business unit specifically in Texas. Luckily for me, I came in pretty hot because when I came into the offices for this location specifically, what I found was an extreme lack of structure in an organization. There was many highly compensated professionals that were not actually capable of performing their duties because the structure was not there for them to be successful. And so my role, actually being director of development, ended up turning into almost like a mini CEO of the region because I had to build the car while I was driving the car and designing the car all at the same time. And it became, had it not been for a massive sign-on bonus, I think I would have left. It's because it was incredibly difficult. I had to work night and day. And never in my life did I experience so much anxiety and it was self-imposed anxiety to be successful. But in order for me specifically as a leader in the company to be successful, I had to create the structure for all the frontline staff to be successful. And in order to do that, I literally had to build the organization back from ground zero. And it became extremely difficult. But, I persevered, and there is a blessing and a curse in this type of experience because when you're given a blank canvas, you're able to fully become the artist. And it allowed me the opportunity to fully understand my capabilities in developing structure for an organization. And in a short 3 years, I became the #1 developer in a Fortune 200 company, having done over $500 million in business for them, all business that I personally developed while building the business itself and structure. And the beauty in all of this was, not only was it rewarding from a monetary perspective, but it was extremely rewarding then to see how other professionals were flourishing given that structure that was being created for them. Similar to children. Again, I tie everything back to being a father because my father gave me an incredible structure growing up. Maybe a little bit more old school and more beatings than I would like, but the structure was absolutely there. And what I learned is, again, the bottom line, the bottom bullet there is I learned to add value beyond the project level and to build organizational structure. Every company you work for is a living organism. And if any component of that organism begins to fail, the whole organization starts to fail from within. And that's what I started to understand as a young leader then, is that I've got this gift to empower other people. And not necessarily myself. I had more, if I could add, my whole concept of life and my profession became then, how can I add value for others? Because if I could do that, at that point it'll turn around and add 10x the value to me as well. And so you see this chart off to the right. This is a very basic chart and it seems simple, but I worked with, if you know some of these energy companies, in a highly commoditized business, where there is no differentiator, and that is transmission infrastructure, I found a niche in two very basic things, and that was speed of delivery and customer service. And it sounds extremely basic, but it was the absolute thing that made me successful. I was able to go pursue RWE out of Germany, Engie out of France, Enel, Nextera themselves on the generation side, and varying other generation developers to interconnect and develop gigawatts of renewable energy in the Texas grid, all in 3 years. So it was an incredible feat to watch the projects move, and we actually had to educate we were moving so fast, we had to educate the regulators on how we were doing it. So all of that one little simple chart gave me the opportunity one day, I randomly one day got a call, and this is absolute truth, and this is fate, I got a call from a hedge fund while sitting in my office at Nextera, and they reached out to me and asked me, hey, would you be willing to start your own company with our backing? And I was like, well, who is this? And so it was not an easy decision. It actually took me 6 months to make the decision. But as luck would have it, I was on my third VP at that point. So above me, there was a rotating door, if you will, of leadership. In Fortune 200 in the US, it's extremely competitive. And not only do you have to be really competent and capable of adding value to a company, but you have to also understand how to navigate the political waters. And so I was already, this was like it was like my 2.5-year mark with the company. I was on my third executive above me, having to again re-educate up the chain of command. And I was blessed because this third executive actually ended up being a terrible human being. And had she not come along, she was very toxic. And it was a perfect example of how not to lead an organization. And I was, I told myself that, I was going to put myself through this experience. And I spent 6 months in this very extremely toxic, actually, environment. And of 10 directors and executive directors at Nextera, I was one of 2 that was still remaining at the end of that 6 months. And so then at that point, I noticed that she wasn't going to be leaving anytime soon. And I had a moral decision in my life to make. Do I want to continue pursuing money for the sake of money? Or do I want to actually go do something different and build it the way I want to build it from a moral standpoint? And so I called the hedge fund back and I said, is the opportunity still open? And they said, absolutely. They actually had scoured the market looking for people like myself, and I was blessed enough that the timing aligned and they waited for me. And so this was not an easy decision. Luckily that my former boss made it an easier decision, but I, at that point in my career, was not, they call these things golden handcuffs if you get stock options at a company when you perform really highly. I was not fully vested in any of my stock options. And so 3 years of incredible growth and performance, I had to leave completely on the table. And it was not small sums of money that we're talking about. But to me, what was more important was actually leading a life that was morally correct. And so I ended up actually leaving it all on the table, starting my own company, and getting extremely uncomfortable. And it's one thing to show it on a slide. It's another thing, guys, to live it. There is no perfect path, as obviously as I've already described in some of my experiences in varying companies. This is probably a great case study of how not to start a company. And these are factors completely unrelated to my performance or abilities. Sometimes, as luck would have it or fate would have it, if you're a faithful person, there are other factors that come into play. And so it was approximately a little less than a year into starting Confluent Power that I actually lost my equity partner. And it was a very tough situation because my business partner he's the CEO of multiple companies, actually. He owns very extremely successful in the energy industry. And he actually ended up getting into odds with the hedge fund. They were partners in varying endeavors, and they went into litigation against each other. He actually ended up outsmarting a hedge fund, as crazy as that sounds. Had a buyout clause in one of their deals that they had structured, exercised it, and overnight, because of a completely separate endeavor, I lost my equity partner because they no longer had trust with him. So that was not like an easy thing, right? Because I had spent over a year looking for acquisition targets. So in private equity, you have multiple options for growth. You have organic growth through development of projects, and then you have inorganic growth through mergers and acquisitions. And so we were doing both. But the fastest way to feed the monster, if you will, in private equity is acquisitions. And so I was busy spending, as they were duking it out in litigation, I was busy lining up multiple acquisition opportunities. Unfortunately, we couldn't come to terms on a path forward. And so I had 2 options, actually. The easy path was go back to a cush job in Fortune 200, make a lot of money and continue. or be humble, the hard path, and go scour the world looking for a new investor. And I had no idea of how to do any kind of fundraising whatsoever. And so imagine with 0 people in my network, right, to guide me or tell me, I literally started cold calling, emailing, and doing everything within my power to find a new equity sponsor and partner. And so in the middle of all of that, I literally spoke to the world. I mean, I spoke to private equities out of South Korea. I spoke to, all over Asia, really. Europe, US, Middle East. And I heard at least 1,000 no's. It was nice when actually they said no. Sometimes they never responded. And what it taught me is that I actually was going to have to be more hard-headed than my Balkan biology was going to allow me to be. And so it became an extremely humbling experience. When you knew you had the capabilities and you knew you had a right strategy to go deploy something special in the market, but you didn't have the right network to make it happen. And unfortunately, that was my first lesson in understanding that I had a robust technical network, but the world of finance is a completely separate monster in a different world that if you don't have people on the inside, it is extremely difficult to break into. And so I did it shamelessly, and in the middle of all of it, as life would have it, more uncertainty and volatility came in. And so my business partner, again, as I said, ran multiple other companies. One day called me and said, as I'm talking to all these investors, pitching investors, he says, "Hey, Amir, I'm going to need your help." And I was like, okay, well, I thought we were closing up shop at that point. I'm like, we're going to call it a day. This is it. End of the road for me. He said, actually, one of my business partners in a different company ended up passing away. He had a heart attack in the shower. He said, would you be willing to run this power plant for me on an interim basis just so we could, get things to steady out, and then we'll look for a replacement, and then you'll go back to doing what you're doing. And I said, absolutely. That's the least I could do for somebody that's given me an opportunity to partner and go into business, right? And so, completely blind faith and trust in this human being, not asking for more money, not asking for equity, not asking for anything. I went and spent the next 4.5, 5 months of my life dedicating insane hours to restructuring, not just keeping the company afloat, but starting to restructure the whole company. I didn't have to do that. In my career, nobody ever asked me to do anything. There were projects assigned to me, and I would always see that the bare minimum I could complete fairly quickly, but then I would go above and beyond and try to actually add more value to those organizations. And what I quickly realized in this organization here as a district energy asset, so that's cogeneration, producing power and thermal energy, I quickly realized that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, if you will. There's a lot of opportunity to fix things. And so immediately, I had never run a power plant before. While I had done design and operations in the transmission grid and distribution grid, I had never operated a power plant. I've interconnected power plants, but never operated one. Those are completely different skill sets. And so I went in blind again, and sadly for me, it was another blank canvas, just like my NextEra experience. My predecessor literally took everything to the grave with him. And so, again, the blessing and the curse. I had a blank canvas, and I sat in a conference room for the next 4 or 5 months and called every regulator, called every engineer in town, and redeveloped the whole documents basis for the power plant, and started to develop from scratch, actually, all compliance, regulations, everything that's required to run a power plant, and never having done this before. And so, and this is all pre-Chat GPT, so a little bit easier now. Would have made my life easier. And so all that to say that there is no shortcut in life to putting yourself through the grinder. You're going to have to put yourself in situations that are going to force you to either do well or break. And that's always been the constant experience that I've had in my career is that I always put myself in positions to get close to the breaking point. And every time I've somehow managed to come out on the other side and learn more from it. So, at the end of the day, after 4 months or so, 5 months or so being in the role, my business partner came to me and said, "Hey, Amir, what do you think about, who's the right person for this? Who's the right person for this role?" And I actually came up with a job description. I think you need somebody who has technical capability, financial acumen, all this stuff. And I actually gave him a couple resumes of different people that I knew in my network. And I said, let's start here. Let's try to get these people hired on. And he talked to a couple of them. They interviewed. And at the end of a month time frame or so, he said, "Amir, what do you think about you just taking this opportunity?" And I was like, "Well, I'm not quite interested in this. I kind of wanted to start my own thing." And he said, "Well, how about we blend Confluent Power and what is to become an Ashley Energy to what is eventually to become CenterStream, right?" And he said, "How about we blend it, restructure our equity deal that we have, and go from there?" And that's exactly what we did. So we took two ideas, blended them together after learning, right, years of learning together, and within a short 6-month time frame, actually ended up getting 2 investors that were very interested in us. Greystar being the big one now that we're currently with. And I'm going to have to accelerate to give you guys an opportunity for Q&A, so I'm not going to go into the full weeds. Even getting the investors was not an easy task. That was an extremely difficult task. Again, you have to have, the moral of the story is if you're ever trying to raise funds, and then through, as luck would have it, Greystar is actually maybe the world's largest owner of student housing. And so they have about 100 existing relationships with large universities in the United States. A lot of the universities in the U.S. have their own power plants on site for varying reasons, research and whatnot, but it actually gives us a leg in to privatize those assets as well, working with Greystar. And so we're now on a hyper-growth mode, hiring multiple executives, a bunch of people in business development, and we'll see where life takes us. But at the end of the day, what is my primary focus as a COO? Maybe it's not a traditional COO at the moment because we don't have a CFO just yet. That's coming here shortly. But it's literally living the life of almost a CEO because you have to understand how to work with people. You have to understand how finance works with your budgets, investors, lenders, everyone. You have to understand how all of that ties into the project itself as well, because in order to get a JP Morgan Chase to underwrite a large $250 million credit facility, you have to de-risk a project for them from every aspect you can imagine. It's no small feat. And so if you can't do that on a technical basis, there's no way they're going to give you the money. And then eventually strategy and risk and understanding how you're going to grow an organization and compete with the likes of the NextEras of the world and other large energy companies. So my 6 life lessons, and I know we're running out of time here, but I have a very basic concept called the 4 F's. And for me, that's faith, family, friends, and fun. For me, like I told you earlier, work is fun. And I mean that fully. I love what I do, and my life is what I do. So there is no blend between I go home or I'm in Europe on vacation no. Every night I'm up till 2, 4 a.m. here working every single day while I'm on my vacation. That's a very normal thing, and that only happens if you love what you do. You cannot go to work thinking I'm at work. You have to thoroughly enjoy it to be able to embody it. Small daily habits will compound over time. If any of you are finance majors, you'll know how interest works. Compounding effects are real. Same with education and knowledge. Career and life reputation. This is extremely important. Your reputation and the trust you earn with people will travel faster than your resume ever will. It takes years and decades to develop it. It takes seconds to lose it. And so having a strict moral compass in everything you do in your life and embodying it is extremely important. Say yes to the hard problems. That made me more successful than anyone else on the technical basis. Learn to speak 3 universal languages, not German, English, Spanish, whatever, Chinese. No, it doesn't matter what language you learn to speak nowadays, but what does matter is understanding the technical side, the financial side, and the human aspect. Those three factors, if you understand how to marry those three, will make you successful in life. And then finally, failure is tuition, not a verdict. Extract the lessons of failures and move on. That is extremely important. If you can't move on, you will never be, if you keep thinking about why me, or why this, you'll never be successful in life. You always have to remind yourself that there's other people that are struggling more than yourself. And there's a quote that I have that every time I've stood in front of people, executives, investors, it doesn't matter who, I always ask myself, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? So that's important. I hope you guys take that with you. We don't have to, this is my personal virtue and my personal way of living life. Hopefully people get slides, copies of slides afterwards. It took me 40 years to develop my philosophy of life. I hope that spending the last 40 minutes with all of you will bring some form of benefit to everyone. So I thank you for your time and look forward to hopefully speaking to some of you soon.
Just stay here. We might have some questions.
I want to be respectful of time. Do we have time?
Yeah, thank you very much. So from education to execution, as your presentation, as you showed us throughout your presentation, thank you very much for your insightful speech. So do we have any question for our guest? Yeah, we have two hands here, I see, and one here.
Thank you very much for your question. I wanted to ask you a bit about Bosnia and Herzegovina and infrastructure in our country. Do you have any opinions on how to improve? And if we start today with that plan, how long would it take us to improve our life, basically?
Yeah, that's actually the perfect question. And the best way to answer that, and I want to be very objective in how I answer this. In any large infrastructure project, that it is extremely capital intensive. In order to generate the returns that are necessary in a de-risked manner for an investor to deploy capital, you have to de-risk it for them. And with large infrastructure such as energy, roads, transport, or anything, that generally means that you have to have policy that dictates and is forward-thinking. So the regulations, one, and policy have to be in place, right, by leadership in the country in order to provide the foundation and a de-risked atmosphere, if you will, for capital to be deployed. And so, and that is the case not just in Bosnia, that is in the US as well. I mean, we just in Texas, for example, passed legislation that allows for 765 kV infrastructure to be developed in the state. And it is required in order to serve as the backbone for large loads such as data centers and oil fields and LNG plants and different things of that nature. But it has to be politicians, unfortunately in this case, it has to be politicians sitting down and being forward strategic thinkers to say, how do we want to set up the structure and the regulations of this country, right, or region, to allow investors to come in and do their thing. So that's a great question, honestly, and this is where many regions of the world fail, and this is absolutely where Texas has thrived.
We have another question here. Yeah, very quick.
It was a nice speech. You mentioned working under a toxic VP for 6 months. I was wondering, could you elaborate on the challenges you faced? What are the biggest challenges you faced under that, and how you dealt with it?
Yeah, great question. So, you know, it was a good experience because, again, like I said, it was a great experience of how not to lead people. And many different aspects, from being disrespectful in meetings, right, not giving people the opportunity to speak professionally, to micromanaging their work and not trusting their work, and just not being flexible with people. I mean, everyone's human and everyone has, you know, somebody that is a high-performing professional does not need to sit in an office 40 hours a week in order to be successful. A high-performing professional, like I said, is working 70, 80-hour weeks. And as a micromanager, you don't need to manage, if you're, as a leader, if you at a VP level, you don't need to micromanage director level, and above. And so, again, my philosophy in parenting, being humbled by my children, actually, because they're two very different kids, they taught me that there's this concept of nature and nurture. And I thought, had I only had one child, I would have thought that, oh man, I'm doing a great job as a father. Nature, or nurture it is, right? It's all me. But then I had my second daughter, who's complete opposite. And boy, did she teach me that nurture is maybe less than half of the percentage, right? Maybe sub 50%. Her nature is very different. And so I've taken on this philosophy with my children of treating them like a flock of sheep. I could take my children to the greenest pastures, but I can't tell them what grass to eat, right? And that's my philosophy also with management. My job as a leader is to take my team to the greenest pastures to let them be successful and graze the best grass possible. But what blades of grass they actually end up eating and how they eat it is up to them. And so that's how I operate. And so that's what she taught me, unfortunately, is that micromanaging is not the way. Yeah. All right, next.
We just have one more question, okay. one more, because we don't have enough time. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you for your speech. I just want to ask, what are the chances and possibilities for Bosnian energy companies to break into the American market?
To break into the American market?
Yes.
From an energy standpoint?
Yes, outsourcing projects, anything that has to do with business.
The beauty of America is the winners are dictated by capital efficiency. So if you want business in America, you're going to have to figure out how to be the most efficient with the capital that's in front of you. Very simple. If you could do more for less, you're going to win. And if you could increase yield for investors, you're going to win. Very basic. There is no obstacle related to being this color or that sex, whatever. No, money is the color and money is green, and that's all they care about.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your inspiring journey, and thank you for sharing this story with all of us here.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.